Being a holder of a Sri Lankan passport, each time I fill in an application for a visa, I am filled with a mixture of dread, uncertainty and even fear. The forms, documents, bank statements, letters, photocopies, more forms, and then there's the interview. The application becomes like a mini Bible, and the questions asked in the process can make even a grown man cry. For her doctoral thesis at Stanford University, Lakmali Jayasinghe decided to explore ways in which visa law and policy impinge on the rights and dignities of applicants from the global south. Her research spanned everything from immigration, borders, border surveillance, and human rights. It was this doctoral thesis that interested me, and so I caught up with Dr. Lakmali Jayasinghe just before she left Sri Lanka for Stanford to get a little more understanding on why the global south, basically people like us, go through what we do when we want to travel. So welcome Lakmali to Kaleidoscope. Your doctoral thesis explored the way visa laws and policies impinge on the rights and dignities of applicants from the global south. What were your main findings, especially when it comes to people from countries like ours who have to bear their very bones in that process?
So there were many interesting research findings, and I think two findings would be of interest to you, I think, and given that we are right now talking about restrictions to do with COVID and travel. One is the fact that the visas come into being in a very specific socio-political context about 10 years before the Second World War. So it's not such a recent phenomena if you look at the history of the visa. So it comes about when Jewish applicants who are trying to flee from the Holocaust, from Nazi persecution, when they try to leave Europe, certain countries in Europe introduce these restrictions because they do not want these Jewish refugees in their countries. So that very specific socio-political history is something I was very intrigued by when I was studying the visa law and policy and the kinds of histories behind those laws and policies. The second point is to do with the fossilization, I would like to call it, of visa law and policy. And what I mean by that is how some of these very discriminatory, racist policies have been used to control the movement of citizens like ourselves from the global south. And that sort of transference of these laws and policies without necessarily being critically aware of those sort of racist biases which come along with those laws is another interesting finding of my research.
Why is it that countries that speak so highly of individual privacy and human rights subject others to such indignities?
Wonderful question, Savitri. Again, I think this has to do with our past. Our history, and as we all know, countries like Sri Lanka in the global south have a colonial history, right? So there are certain neo-colonial attitudes which are embedded in these visa laws and policies, which I think are not being critically thought about when these laws are applied to, again, citizens like ourselves.
Given what the pandemic has taught us about travel, what policies do you think needs to change in the immediate in the context of adding that dignity to this whole visa process?
So one of the concerns I have, especially in this pandemic period and even in the post-pandemic period, is the danger of more restrictions being introduced to the visa process by the first world. For instance, already if you look at the digital COVID certificate, which was launched on July 1st, just a month ago roughly, by the European Union, it does not recognize the AstraZeneca version of the vaccine that we have received in Sri Lanka. It only recognizes the vaccines which have been okayed by the European Medicines Agency. Now, what does that mean for you and I as citizens of countries like Sri Lanka who want to travel to Europe? So these are some of the bigger concerns we have to be aware of in the post-pandemic or the pandemic period actually.
In the longer term, how can visas be better managed for this part of the world, protecting the global south's rights, so to speak?
So I think it doesn't cost a lot to give dignity to another human being, and in this specific scenario, how can we make the whole visa application process more dignified? Is it necessary that applicants have to go through an extremely undignifying process and face a lot of processes which violate your privacy, which require you to give away extremely sensitive information, which make you feel like you are really second-class citizens of the world? So I think one of the things which are important to consider is how can we humanize this process, because there is no way that we can really get rid of the visa process, but then can we not make it into a more dignified process?
And do you think that will ever happen?
I think we should try our best to make that happen, and I think it is partly our responsibility to push for changes which we need to be working on in the future, and I hope that's where my own research will contribute to.
Now, wouldn't that be just perfect if only dignity is brought back into the visa process, like Lakmali said. Thank you so much, Lakmali, for coming in. Good luck in your work at Stanford, and I hope more research will hopefully bring in more results. If you like what we had for you today, do like us on YouTube, subscribe to Kaleidoscope with Savitri Rodrigo, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram.
Making all your new goals in life a reality is why our strength is your strength. With 12 billion rupees worth of customer benefits in 2020 and a life insurance fund worth over 100 billion rupees, our strength is your strength. You focus on your goals, we will take care of the risks. Srilanka Life.